All your school rugby, all in one place. This is NextGen 15.
Alright guys, welcome to NextGen 15. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at the top 10 rugby captains of all time. So if you are new to our channel, please don't forget to click that subscribe button as well as bell notification. And as soon as new videos are released, you'll be the first to know. So let's get into our top 10. In 10th place, we have John Smit from South Africa. The 50th captain of South Africa and the man who has made the most appearances for South Africa as a captain by some distance, Barney, as he's known amongst his teammates, stands as a true legend of the game. An alumni of Pretoria Boys High, Smit was known as a ferocious and uncompromising prop forward at school level. He gained SA school selection, after which the Sharks came knocking, with young Smit making the move to the Durban-based outfit in 1997. While at the Sharks, it was suggested the young prop move to the hooking position, and it was said move which paid off, resulting in Smit making his Springbok debut only 3 years later against Canada. In 2004, when Drake White was named the new Springbok coach, before a ball was even kicked, he was named his captain, and this began one of the most storied partnerships in rugby history. In their first year, the Springboks won the Rugby Championship, a feat which they had not achieved since 1998. A mainstay in the Springbok squad, not only was Smit known for his leadership on the field, but he was a consistent player as well, having played in a record 46 consecutive tests between 2003 and 2007. The 2007 Rugby World Cup beckoned, and although the Springboks had a relatively straightforward pool stage, the campaign threatened to be derailed by our game Fiji side in the quarterfinals. It was during this game that Smith's leadership ability came to the fore, and he inspired his troops to perform a turnaround and easy dispense of the Highlanders. At the end, it was to be Smith's year, with his team lifting the William Webb Eales Trophy after beating the English by a far more comfortable margin than the scoreline suggests. The White-Smith partnership had shown its mettle, but it was to end after White's contract was not renewed. Citra's new coach Peter de Villiers' respect for Smit, that as soon as he was named coach, one of the first things he did was to reappoint him as the South African captain. The move paid off as he led the Springboks to a series win over the British and Irish Lions, as well as a rugby championship in 2009. Smit led a Springbok team high in confidence into the 2011 World Cup. The team were controversially eliminated at the quarterfinal stage of the tournament, after which South Africa's longest-serving captain caught time on his career. In 9th place, we have Bull Beaumont from England. Bull Beaumont will go down as the right man at the right time when future generations speak of the legendary English skipper. When a young lock named Beaumont made his debut for England in 1975 as a lanky young 22-year-old, few would have expected the massive impact he would have on the game and how his leadership would usher in a new era for English rugby. During this time, England were nowhere near a powerhouse of world rugby, and Wales were riding high on the wave of a golden generation. It was under these trying circumstances, with year after year of disappointment, Beaumont's legendary character was developed. His first taste of success was when he led the Northern region to a historic win in 1979 over the touring New Zealanders, widely considered one of the best in world rugby at the time. But it was in 1980 that Beaumont's name would enter rugby legend by leading England to their first Five Nations title since 1973 and their first Grand Slam since 1957. Such was the esteem he was held in. Immediately after this tournament, he was named captain of the 1980 British and Irish Lions team tour to South Africa. This would prove to be a difficult task, as the Welsh and English players had a bloody encounter just months before the tour started. Beaumont's leadership showed that he united a team and was considered a universally popular leader, and was the side's first English captain since Doug Prentice in 1930. Beaumont would go on to win 34 caps for England, which was a record at the time for a lock, and was captain for 21 of those times. His hard playing style and disregard for his own body led him to retire early from rugby, aged only 30 in 1982 under the advice of doctors, but he still is remembered to this day as a legend of English rugby. In 8th place, we have Kolisi from South Africa. Some may argue that it may be a bit too early to put Kolisi on this esteemed list, but perhaps listening to the reasoning of a South African armchair critic who tries his best to hide his own personal biases might lead our international audience to soften their stance. When Kolisi took over as South African captain in 2018, South African rugby was at its lowest point. It was ranked 7th in the world, and having lost to Italy for the first time in the proud nation's history, many saw the Bok captaincy as a poisoned chalice of sorts. The Coetzee tenure will not be fondly remembered by Springbok fans, and while the appointment of Rassie Erasmus was seen as a step in the right direction at the time, many of us supporters felt it may be too little too late, and that a respectable finish in the World Cup and a few wins would have sufficed. The Erasmus-Kolisi partnership defied all expectations. Erasmus, the extrovert, would psych his team up with inspiring team talks and provide much of the spirit within the camp, while Kolisi's calm demeanour ensured that the Springboks never lost sight of their overall goal and never let the occasion overwhelm them. Kolisi, South Africa's first ever black captain, first lifted the Rugby Championship trophy and followed this up with a World Cup win. What made 2019 so special was the fact that it was the first time a team had won both the Rugby Championship and World Cup in a calendar year, and it marked the first time as well that a team had lost a game and still gone on to win a World Cup. Kolisi's role in this was underappreciated. One cannot underestimate the role of a strong and resilient leader in any circumstance. For Kolisi, who had grown up on the tough streets of Zuid, a loss in a rugby game meant little in terms of the bigger picture. His background and inner strength was something that gave his teammates, many of whom came from more privileged backgrounds, a sense of perspective, and we truly believe this is what made the difference between winning and losing. The Kolisi story is still being written. Perhaps it is too early for him to be on this list, but when it comes to inspirational stories and captains, there are fewer more inspiring than Sia. And we do anticipate that should we do this list in a few more years, we will certainly see him rise up in these rankings. In 7th place, we have Jacques Fouroux from France. Only 5 feet and 3 inches tall, Fouroux was certainly never seen as someone who would go on to become a legend of the game, but despite his stature, he would go on to win a Grand Slam as a player and 2 as a coach, with a journey to the inaugural World Cup final a part of his impressive CV. So how did a diminutive scrum half go on to lead the French pack of the 1970s, arguably the toughest pack of all time? Well, the clue should be in the fact that his nickname was the Little Corporal, after Napoleon Bonaparte. He began his career playing for his hometown club of FC Auch, as well as making a return toward the end of his career. Other teams he played for included US Cognac and La Voltaire until 1976. His size meant nothing to him, such was his confidence. Most opponents would see it as arrogance, but to his team he was a leader, an inspiration, and the Little Corporal became the backbone of the French rugby team during this period. There has not been a scrum half quite like Fouroux in rugby. While most shy away from the confrontation, he was ecstatic when the tough got going, and his teammates would obviously describe him as the 9th forward. In 1975, a fairly confident French team entered the Five Nations, believing at the time that they could be the next champions, this being the first team in nearly a decade to win a Grand Slam. They were, however, proven decisively wrong, something they had to give, and finally the French authorities decided it was worth the risk installing Fouroux as the next French captain. It was in 1976 that he had been given the captaincy. There were some who had their doubts over smaller scrum half facing up to larger Eales players, but in Fouroux they need not worry. The man stood back for nobody and was a consistent menacing threat to his opposition, getting stuck into the physical side of the game whenever it pleased him. And when not, he ordered one of the forwards to lay siege to the opposition territory. His hero, Napoleon, would have been proud. His debut tournament as captain ended well for the French, with the team only losing a single game to the rampant Welsh team, and perhaps the highlight of the French tournament was an emphatic 30-9 win over the old enemy England. A confident French team went into the 1977 season with the belief that the tournament was theirs to lose. With their Little Corporal in tow, the nation awaited what they felt would be a blockbuster tournament, and the French team showed quickly they would oblige. What happened next was a Grand Slam tournament in which the French won all their games with ease. This was the first Grand Slam win since 1968. Jacques Fouroux, however, populous captain, had tremendous issue with authority figures, and these back and forths led him to be sacked as French skipper. France went through somewhat of a barren patch as Fouroux's time as captain came to an end. This, however, ended in 1981 when the Little Corporal was appointed French head coach and duly delivered them another Grand Slam. During his tenure as coach, he would go on to win 4 Five Nations titles, 2 Grand Slams, and reach the final of the inaugural Rugby World Cup in 1987. He was again sacked through a palace coup, with rugby administrators and their allies ensuring he would not see another game after a controversial loss to Romania. The Little Corporal passed away in 2005, but his devotion to French rugby and his impact on the game will never be forgotten. In 6th place, we have Willie John McBride from Ireland. A colossus and a true legend of the game, Willie John personified the spirit of the Lion both on and off the field of play. McBride would begin his international career in 1962 against England and performed admirably enough to be selected to the Tour de South Africa later that year. He would continue to play for Ireland and help them to a first ever win in South Africa and over Australia, which was the first time an Irish team had done so. But it was more about the challenges he had to face as a player and captain than it was about his successes. McBride played in a time where Irish rugby was far from dominant and disappointment was the order of the day. The Southern Hemisphere teams were far and away the dominant powers in world rugby. In Europe, they had to contend with the generationally gifted Welsh squad as well as a French team that was a juggernaut in terms of their physicality. McBride never gave up and would play as if his life depended on it, game after game. In 1974, his hard work and dedication would finally pay off, with the Irish finally winning the Five Nations title in their first outright win since 1951. It was then that the Lions team to tour South Africa was named, Willie John McBride being named captain. Many in the media felt the veteran was over the hill and preferred younger and more dynamic players join the tour, the logic being the South Africans' physicality would overwhelm the older McBride. Sid Miller, as coach and a fellow Irishman, discussed strategy with McBride, with the decision being that instead of being reactive, the Lions would go after the Springboks physically, and the now infamous 99 core was initiated. With McBride leading from the front, the British and Irish Lions completed an unbelievable series, winning 21 of the 22 matches on tour with the one draw and beating the Springboks 3-0 in the series. Doc Craven later said that this was the greatest team to have ever toured the Republic, and one would find that hard to disagree with. The following year would be McBride's last as an international rugby player. Having never scored a try in his beloved emerald green jersey, it was fitting that it was his last game at Lansdowne Road, which would result in his first ever test try, a parting gift for one of Ireland's favourite sons. 63 tests for Ireland and 17 for the British and Irish Lions shows the magnitude of his immense career. McBride was not just a fantastic player, but a leader whose achievements will live long in the memory of rugby supporters globally. In fifth place we have John Eales from Australia. Eales had the nickname Nobody, as in nobody's perfect, and for very good reason. When it comes to international locks, there are none in history that can hold a candle to Eales' versatility. When it comes to honours in the game, Eales has done it all virtually. Eales made his test debut for Australia in 1991, only 1 year after his first appearance for Queensland, and was later included in the 1991 World Cup winning Australian team. He gradually became a regular for the Wallabies and was widely recognised as one of the most promising young forwards on the planet. He was a key player in Queensland's Super 10 victories in 1994 and 1995 and would go on to represent Australia at the 1995 World Cup, where the team underperformed, being knocked out in the quarterfinals by a Rob Andrew-inspired England. It was clear to many in Australian rugby that a change was needed, and Eales was awarded the captaincy in 1996, the dawn of the professional era in rugby. In an era where New Zealand were the dominant power, Eales inspired his troops to multiple victories over the mighty All Blacks. In the 11 matches he captained the Wallabies, he led his troops to 6 wins and 5 losses, a record no other captain at the time could lay claim to. Despite a difficult start in the Tri-Nations, he would lead the Wallabies to 4 successive Bledisloe Cup wins over their fierce rivals, as well as 2 outright tournament victories, cementing Australia's status as a rising power in rugby. Perhaps his crowning moment came when he led a highly rated yet unfancied Australian team to a World Cup victory in the 1999 tournament, becoming one of only a handful of players at the time to win 2 World Cups. While most would have retired, Eales continued captaining the Wallabies with the Lions series on the horizon, and in 2001 he added yet another Bledisloe Cup trophy and Tri-Nations Championship to his list of achievements before leading the Wallabies to a series win over the British and Irish Lions. What makes the series even more impressive is the fact the Wallabies were heavily defeated in the first test, and the final 2 wins were almost directly attributed to Eales and his ability to lead his troops into battle. In fourth place we have Sean Fitzpatrick from New Zealand. Being the son of an All Black means that from a young age there's additional pressure on you as a player, but it is under this kind of pressure that a player of Fitzpatrick's magnitude thrived. Schooled at the famous Sacred Heart in Auckland, the future great's talent was noted at an early age, and while still progressing through the ranks at his beloved Auckland, the year 1986 would forever change the young hooker's life. The 1986 Cavaliers Rebel Tour to South Africa was unendorsed by the New Zealand Rugby Union, and thus several of their star players were definitely suspended from representing the All Blacks. Fitzpatrick was among a number of baby blacks that were thrown into the deep end, with a series against France being undertaken that same year. New Zealand won the series, and a few players, including Fitzpatrick, managed to impress selectors enough to be selected for the inaugural World Cup in 1987. He would, however, be expected to play second fiddle to Andy Dalton. As fate would have it, Dalton would be injured, and the young Fitzpatrick was selected and never looked back, playing a key part in New Zealand's World Cup win and writing his name into rugby folklore. 1992 was the dawn of a new era for world rugby, as South Africa was finally readmitted into the global game. Fitzpatrick would be selected as captain in the team that would be the Republic's first opponents on the international stage, with the All Blacks running out 27-24 victors. The following year he would lead the All Blacks to a stunning series win over a highly rated British and Irish Lions team, and just 1 year later would complete a series win over South Africa and New Zealand. The World Cup beckoned, and the All Blacks had arguably one of the strongest squads at the time. They made the final with ease and were considered heavy favourites for the final game of the tournament, but were undone by a Joel Stransky drop goal. Naturally, Fitzpatrick and his team were gutted, and there were even cause for his resignation as captain. The New Zealand administrators, however, decided to stick by Fitzpatrick as a series to South Africa was to be contested the following year. It was 1996 and the game had just turned professional. Fitzpatrick would have the year of his life, winning the MPC and Ranfurly Shield domestically with Auckland, the Super Rugby title with the Blues, and completing the double of the Tri-Nation and Bledisloe Cup to boot. These achievements, as impressive as they were, however, paled into comparison to Fitzpatrick's crowning career moment, becoming the first ever New Zealand captain to lead his team to a series victory over South Africa in South Africa. Many of the legendary All Blacks had failed to do so, and it was telling that a man who really shows his emotions could not contain them at the final whistle. Fitzpatrick had done something not even his legendary father could do. Fitzpatrick would go out with a bang in 1997, leading the All Blacks to yet another double in terms of the Bledisloe Cup and Tri-Nations, as well as the Auckland Blues' dominant win in Super Rugby. All told, by the time he retired, he had accumulated 24 trophies over his career, many of those as captain. In third place, we have Martin Johnson from England. A colossus of the game, Martin Johnson was a player whose reputation garners nothing but respect from opposition throughout the globe. A more influential figure in terms of English rugby will be hard to find. Johnson was always destined for the very top of the game, a giant lock standing at 6'7" and weighing nearly 120 kilograms. He mixed the enforcing role and a huge amount of athleticism to be a complete lock and was one of the finest on the planet during the 1990s. He made his debut for Leicester aged only 19 and a mere 4 years later would become a full England international. While there was never doubt about Johnson the player, there was never any clue as to the captain the man would become. His first taste of captain would only come in 1997 when he was named captain for the British and Irish Lions on their tour to South Africa. Johnson being named captain was to intimidate the opposition and to gain a psychological edge in the build-up to each game, with the Englishman towering over his opposite number. The move worked a treat, with the Lions completing a famous 2-1 series win over the South Africans in what was truly a brutal series filled with physical clashes, and with Johnson leading from the front line, the Lions were not going to stand back for anyone. After returning home as a triumphant Lions captain, Johnson would be named captain of his club Leicester. The move led to a period of sustained glory for the club that he would play for over his entire career, Johnson raising the Premiership 4 times and the Heineken Cup twice. The Leicester team of this period is widely recognised as one of the finest club teams to have ever existed. Johnson did not only taste domestic success but international success as well. Upon Lawrence Dallaglio's losing the England captaincy in 1999, Johnson took up the responsibility. His most pressing assignment at the time was the 1999 World Cup, where England were considered one of the front runners in the tournament, but would ultimately be knocked out by Jannie de Beer and spied South Africa in the quarterfinals. Johnson, however, learned from this experience and would go on to lead the English to 2 Six Nations titles in 2000 and 2001, as well as a Triple Crown in 2002. 2003 was the year it would all come together for Johnson. First, he'd win a Grand Slam and Triple Crown in what was considered to be one of the most dominant performances ever by a team in the Six Nations. Later in 2003, England shocked friend and foe alike with a win away in New Zealand. This, to many, asserted England's credentials to win the 2003 World Cup. Anyone who doubted England's pedigree that year were left with no doubt when Johnson became the first and so far only Northern Hemisphere captain to lift the coveted William Webb Ellis Trophy, and this ensured he would achieve legend status in the game. Johnson would retire with 21 trophies to his name in a career that included over 350 games for the Leicester Tigers, 84 for England and 8 for the Lions. 44 of those 84 English matches were as captain, with Johnson skippering the team to 39 wins and retiring with an astonishing 89% win rate as a captain. In second place, we have Francois Pienaar from South Africa. Francois Pienaar to this day is considered an icon of not only South African rugby but of world rugby. Pienaar was a born leader. Ask anyone who played alongside him in the late 1980s and early 1990s and you'll know that there was no doubt that this was going to be the man one day to lead the Springboks. Despite his many successes, few know the challenges Pienaar had to face during his career, and it is these challenges that would define his career as a whole, both as a player and a leader. A highly rated school player, Pienaar trod the path less taken by representing Hoërskool Patriot in Witbank, an unfancied school in the Pumas region, and still being selected to play for the SA schools team. His performances led to him being offered a scholarship at Rand Afrikaans University, and it was here that a number of provincial unions came forward with offers, but it was Transvaal that ultimately won the race for a young Pienaar, and he would make his debut in 1989. Upon Ross Bode's retirement, there was much speculation as to who would take over the Bok captaincy. Having just led Transvaal to a Super 10 title, it seemed that Pienaar would be the obvious choice, and coach Ian McIntosh wasted little time in naming his new skipper. Domestically, Pienaar could do no wrong. Along with the Super 10 title, Transvaal had managed to secure first Currie Cup championship in over 20 years, as well as a Lion Cup. Internationally, however, there were those who questioned Pienaar's lack of experience, and the results did not help matters. A home series loss to France began the Pienaar era, with many in South Africa shocked at such a result, particularly against the French team an aging Springbok side had beaten just a year before away from home. A series in Australia would follow, with the first test going the way of the Springboks. The type of rugby played inspired many back home, and it seemed that the team were on the right track. They would, however, lose the next two matches and thus the series. Two series losses in a row for a new captain were not the ideal conditions, to say the very least. A mixed bag of results, with a drawn home series against the English as well as a series loss against the All Blacks in New Zealand, meant the only series win the Springboks had achieved under the McIntosh and Pienaar era was a 2-0 series win over a lowly Argentina team. It was clear something had to change, with many calling for Pienaar to give up the captaincy. To Louis Lade's credit, he preferred to stick with the captain and support him through the hiring of Kitch Christie as the Springbok head coach. The duo, it was believed, understood each other, and the majority of the squad hailing from the Transvaal team, it was logical that this would ease internal tensions a year before South Africa was due to host the World Cup on home soil. The move proved a masterstroke, with the duo leading South Africa to 14 straight victories, which included an against all odds win over New Zealand in the final. Pienaar's leadership and Christie's passion were the right ingredients at the time. Christie unfortunately had to give up the Springbok position due to health reasons, and while Pienaar would go on to play for the Springboks for a further year after leading them to the World Cup, his relationship with then coach Andre Markgraaff was tumultuous, to say the very least. He would play his last test against the All Blacks in Cape Town. An 18-29 loss was no way of a man of his stature to leave the international game, but it's often a case of us not being able to choose the ending we want. Pienaar may not have been the most talented flanker in South African history, but to lead a nation wounded by a horrific past and unite with the symbol of the new South African Nelson Mandela showcased how one Afrikaans boy from the wrong side of the tracks could help in uniting a nation, and as this we rank him so highly on this list. And in first place should be no surprise here, Richie McCaw from New Zealand. If one had to genetically engineer the perfect rugby player, give him all the physical attributes that money could buy, it would certainly still not hold a candle to the phenomenon that is Richie McCaw. You see, while physical attributes are certainly an important factor, it is sometimes the spirit of the player that allows him to rise above all others and attain legend status, and Richie McCaw is very much a legend of the game. A product of Otago boys, McCaw's leadership abilities were evident early on, with him being the head boy of the school and a key player in the school's first and only national title win in 1998. He was, however, overlooked by the selectors and failed to make the New Zealand schools team. Strong performances while at Lincoln University meant McCaw was selected for the New Zealand under-19 team in 1999 and would gain his first piece of notable silverware, with New Zealand winning the under-19 championship. The following year was a big year for the young talent, being selected for the under-21 national team as well as making his senior debut for Canterbury. The following year he was named captain of the under-21 team, and with many praising his performance's leadership, New Zealand managed to win yet another under-21 title. That same year, the 21-year-old McCaw would make his Crusaders debut. It was a rather underwhelming season with only 8 minutes of total game time. He did, however, have a full season in NPC, and his form did not go unnoticed. By the end of the year, John Mitchell, the then All Black coach, shocked the nation by naming an inexperienced McCaw to his end-of-year touring squad. Many were shocked at a player being selected based on one season in the NPC. McCaw made his debut against Ireland, and his first touch of the game in fact resulted in a knock-on, and the All Blacks went into half-time 16-7 down. An inspiring second-half turnaround led to the All Blacks claiming a 40-29 victory, but it was the performances of the young prospect that stood out, with McCaw being named man of the match and receiving a standing ovation at the post-match function. It was clear a legend was born. He continued his rich vein of form and was rewarded with the Crusaders captaincy in 2005 and immediately led them to the Super Rugby title, his first as captain and his second as player. In 2006, McCaw was finally named All Black captain and did the double that year by captaining the Crusaders to victory in Super Rugby as well as leading the All Blacks to a Tri-Nations title. To add to his impressive year, he was named both New Zealand and World Rugby Player of the Year. 2007 was the year everyone at home and abroad was convinced the All Blacks would finally break their World Cup duck. Having not won the tournament in 20 years, the All Blacks management took the decision to rest McCaw and other key players for the first half of the Super Rugby tournament. The Crusaders would be knocked out in the semi-finals of the tournament, and yet more disappointment was to follow, with New Zealand being knocked out of the World Cup quarterfinals by an unfancied French team. There were growing calls for the head of both McCaw and coach Graham Henry. The All Black management, however, decided to stick by this combination and proved to be a masterstroke. McCaw had been named RB Player of the Year in 2009 and 2010, and by 2011, with the World Cup being held in New Zealand, it was felt by many that this was the time for the New Zealand to break their duck. A tense final against the French took place, which was a real back and forth, with New Zealand finally securing the victory and winning the William Webb Eales Trophy for the first time since 1987. Richie McCaw, the greatest All Black to have ever played the game, finally lifted the trophy for the first time in 34 years. New Zealand could lay claim to being world champions. Not satisfied with one World Cup, McCaw would again repeat the feat in 2015, this time with a more comprehensive victory over Trans-Tasman rivals Australia. McCaw would become the only captain to have lifted the William Webb Eales Trophy twice and make history as not only the game's greatest player, but the greatest captain to have ever led his troops into battle. In a glittering career, McCaw's trophy cabinet would be full to the brim: 6 NPC trophies, 4 Super Rugby trophies, 10 Rugby Championship trophies, and 13 Player of the Year awards. McCaw would captain New Zealand on 110 occasions, and on 97 occasions would he taste victory, thus giving him a winning percentage of 88%, a feat that will likely never be matched. Being alive during the McCaw era as a supporter of any national team outside of New Zealand was a period of frustration, to say the least. But when we all look back, we will understand that it was truly a privilege, as he was one of a kind, and to say that one had seen Richie McCaw take to the field and play this game is a blessing in itself. McCaw turned rugby into an art form, and his leadership inspired not only a team, but a nation. The respect he commanded transcended borders, and there's no person who loves this game that cannot say that they hold Richie McCaw in the highest esteem. In 2016, Richie McCaw's status as an icon of New Zealand was cemented when he was appointed a member of the Order of New Zealand, a title that can only be carried by 20 living New Zealanders. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please don't forget to click that subscribe button as well as smash the like button, and let us know in the comment section below what you thought of this video. Have a great week further. Cheers. Bye.